December 23rd, 1944, around 11:45 in the morning. A German lookout spot on Senamps Hill, Belgium. The binoculars shook a little as a German lookout from the 26th Volk Grenadier Division pressed them to his eyes, seeing something that would change his view of the war forever. Around noon on December 23rd, the weather cleared, allowing the first supply drop by air, flown by 241 C-47 airplanes. My gosh, the sky, it's full of them. Hundreds and hundreds. This can't be real. Through the German lookout scope, he saw transport planes fill the Belgian sky like flocks of birds. Not the handful of planes that desperate defenders might pull together, but a huge fleet dropping supplies to the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Until December 23rd, the weather had stopped any supply drops. But now, the Americans were showing a level of air power that made the German Army's greatest wins seem like a distant memory. Soldiers of General Major Heinz Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division saw from their blockade positions as colored parachutes opened up across the winter sky. Red for bullets and shells, blue for medical items, yellow for food, and white for other goods. The entire German Air Force couldn't put on a mission this big. They hadn't been able to since the catastrophe at Stalingrad 2 years before. Yet here, over one tiny Belgian town, the Americans were easily showing air power that surpassed anything the Third Reich had ever accomplished, even at its strongest. The numbers of failure were being written not in battlefield moves or brave final stands, but in the simple, massive show of American supply advantage that would turn tough German soldiers into witnesses of their own empire's certain downfall. The attack had started with great certainty 7 days earlier. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., the Germans began the attack with a huge 90-minute artillery bombardment, using 1,600 big guns across an 80-mile front. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last desperate risk to divide the Allied forces and retake the key port of Antwerp, had at first gone better than expected. General Major Heinz Kokot of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division said, "During the evening of December 15th, the last troop repositioning took place. It was cold and dark. The narrow roads of the Eifel, some covered with ice, were packed tightly with troops and vehicles moving forward to their starting points and firing positions. The soldiers had been told this was Germany's moment of fate. The leader himself had planned this attack, promising them that the soft, weak Americans would fall apart before German strong will. Their lines in the Ardennes were held by green troops and tired units sent there to rest. The German army would cut through them like in the best days of 1940, when German forces had defeated France in 6 weeks. Among the attacking units was the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, a unit put back together after being wiped out on the Eastern Front. Oberst Heinz Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division was a weakened unit, keeping a few experienced soldiers from the Russian and Normandy fronts, but mostly filled with Air Force and Marine replacements. Even with their mixed makeup, their spirits were high. They had been promised new weapons, enough supplies, and the benefit of total surprise. The early success seemed to confirm every promise. The Americans' first feeling was that this was the expected small counter-move. The German army had achieved complete surprise on the battlefield. American positions fell apart under the force of the attack. Whole units gave up or ran west in fear. The roads to Antwerp looked open. By December 18th, German forces were moving toward their goals with amazing quickness. Hasso von Manteuffel, leading the 5th Panzer Army, gave Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz's 47th Panzer Corps the job of taking Bastogne before crossing the Meuse River near Namur. The numbers of the attack seemed simple. 7 main roads came together at Bastogne. Control those roads and you control the entire American supply network in the Ardennes. Without Bastogne, the Americans couldn't bring in new troops, couldn't supply their men, and couldn't launch a counterattack. The German attack plan was a big goal, but seemed possible. Luttwitz planned to attack a 7-mile front with 3 divisions. The 26th Volksgrenadier and the 2nd Panzer would lead the attack, with the Panzer Lehr Division behind them. These were skilled units, veterans of many battles, supplied with some of Germany's best remaining tanks and attack guns. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division moved forward with special resolve. Its anti-tank battalion had its full number of 14 tracked Hetzer tank hunters and a remarkable 42 75mm anti-tank guns, making the 26th one of the best supplied Volksgrenadier units in the Ardennes. They were ready for American tanks, ready for desperate counter-moves, ready for anything except what they would actually face. But the first clues of something unusual started to show as they got near Bastogne. The Americans weren't just running away in chaos. They were pulling back in an orderly way, destroying bridges, setting up blockades, and making the Germans fight for every mile. Units like CCB, 10th Armored Division, held the Germans back long enough for the first groups of the 101st Airborne Division to get to Bastogne, just 4 hours ahead of the leading German forces. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, had been resting in Reims, France, when the German attack started. Within hours, they were put on trucks and speeding through the night toward Bastogne. They arrived tired, poorly supplied for winter fighting, and were immediately put into defense lines. Yet, they arrived just in time, and that would change everything. By December 20th, German forces had completely circled Bastogne. All 7 main roads leading to the town were blocked by German forces by noon on December 21st. By evening, the mix of airborne and armored infantry was seen by both sides as being surrounded. The trap was sprung. Inside were parts of the 101st Airborne Division, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and various other units, about 22,000 men in all. The American soldiers were outnumbered about 5 to 1 and were without cold-weather clothes, bullets, food, medical items, and top commanders as many senior officers, including the 101st's leader, Major General Maxwell Taylor, were somewhere else. From the German viewpoint, it was Stalingrad in reverse. Now it was the Americans who were trapped, cut off, and fated to give up or die. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, leading the 47th Panzer Corps, was very sure of himself. He had been in France in 1940 when the British Army was trapped at Dunkirk. He had seen what happens to surrounded forces. They weakened, their spirits broke down, and they gave up. The Americans in Bastogne had maybe 3 days of ammunition and perhaps 4 days of food if they were careful. The severe winter weather, with temperatures dropping to 10 degrees C, would do half the work for him. The confidence was so high that the 2 panzer divisions of the 47th Panzer Corps, after cutting off Bastogne, kept on with their goal toward the Meuse on December 22nd instead of attacking the town with a single large force. They left just 1 regiment behind to help the 26th Volksgrenadier Division take the crossroads. Why waste valuable tanks and fuel on a town that would fall from hunger and cold? The main goal was Antwerp. Bastogne was just a bothersome problem that would take care of itself. From December 16th to December 22nd, the weather had been Germany's best friend. Low clouds, freezing fog, and snow had kept the dreaded Allied air forces on the ground. The Germans also used the very cloudy conditions that grounded the Allies' better air forces for a long time. For the first time since Normandy, German forces could travel during the day without worrying about attack planes. They could group their troops without being seen by spy planes. They could attack without facing the widespread bombing that had wiped out so many German units in France. Inside Bastogne, things got worse and worse with each day. Some guns had no high-explosive shells left, and others had only a half-dozen or so. Food packs were completely gone. The defenders were left looking for supplies from destroyed vehicles and abandoned storage areas. Medical items were dangerously low. Wounded men were dying from treatable injuries. On December 22nd, sure of a quick win, the Germans sent their final demand for surrender. The scene was very formal, like a play. On December 22nd, 1944, at about 11:30 in the morning, a group of 4 German soldiers waving 2 white flags came near the American lines, using the Arlon Road from the direction of Remo, south of Bastogne. The senior officer was a Major Wagner of the 47th Panzer Corps. The junior officer, Lieutenant Helmuth Henke of the Panzer Lehr Operations Section, was carrying a case under his arm. They had even brought blindfolds, sure they would be taken to the American commander to discuss surrender terms. The final demand was typed in both English and German, formal and menacing. The fortune of war is changing. This time, the USA forces in and near Bastogne have been encircled by strong German armored units. More German armored units have crossed the river Orth near Orthouville, have taken Marche, and reached St. Hubert by passing through Hompré-Cibré-Tillet. The message went on to demand a surrender with dignity within 2 hours, threatening complete destruction if they refused. From the German viewpoint, they were being kind, offering the Americans a way to avoid needless killing. When the American reply came back, a single word, nuts, the German command was genuinely confused. McAuliffe reportedly replied with the mysterious statement, nuts. This answer confused the Germans at first. Lieutenant Henke had to have it explained by Colonel Harper. If you don't understand what nuts means, in plain English, it is the same as go to hell. Back at German headquarters, the reply caused confusion and worry. No surrounded force had ever replied so disrespectfully to a surrender demand. General Major Kokot was reportedly shocked. In later questioning, he would say, "We offered honorable terms. We had them surrounded 5-1. No supplies could reach them. To refuse seemed not brave, but insane." The clear morning of December 23, 1944, began with something the Germans hadn't seen in a week: clear skies. On December 23rd, the weather started getting better, letting the Allied air forces attack. German soldiers came out of their frozen fighting holes, happy for sunshine that might warm their frozen arms and legs. Many had spent the night in very cold temperatures, their feet numb and their weapons frozen. Then they heard it, a distant humming sound that grew louder, bouncing off the hills around Bastogne. At 6:45 in the morning on December 23rd, planes carrying the 2 guide teams took off from Chalgrove, headed for Belgium. These were the first groups, the guides who would mark the drop areas for the main group. They jumped at 9:35 a.m. and were quickly picked up by American forces and hurried to set up their gear. At 11:50 on the 23rd, men all along the front saw the planes coming in. It was the most uplifting sight of the entire blockade. For the Americans, it was rescue. For the Germans, it was the start of understanding their big mistake. The main group showed up at 11:50 a.m. 241 C-47 airplanes, flying in an exact arrangement at just 1,000 feet high. They came in waves, each group of planes dropping their goods in order, the sky filling with parachutes of different colors, each color showing different supplies. German anti-aircraft crews hurried to their guns. The 88mm flak guns, the pride of the German artillery, turned toward the sky. 20mm automatic cannons started their rapid noise. Machine guns joined the loud buildup. The sky filled with black clouds of exploding shells. German anti-aircraft fire burst all around the plane. After one very loud bang, McNeice and Sergeant Mertz flinched. A hole in the plane's body showed that an enemy round had passed between the 2 men, who were only inches apart. The American planes flew straight through the fire, staying in formation with an almost death-defying resolve. 14 C-47s were lost on their way or over the drop area, shot down or so badly damaged they crashed. But for every plane that went down, 15 more stayed on course, doors open, bundles falling out into the December sky. German soldiers watched in shock as damaged airplanes, with engines smoking and wings torn by flak, stayed on course long enough to drop their supplies before turning away or crashing. One C-47, its tail completely on fire, flew right over German positions, the crew pushing out supply bundles until the very last moment before the plane dove into the forest. What came next was a perfect lesson in American supply, lines that broke German spirits more effectively than any artillery bombardment. The colored parachutes came down like a colorful snowfall. Thousands upon thousands of them floated down onto the snow-covered fields around Bastogne. The sight of the colored supply chutes made the paratroopers happy. But for every American heart that rose, a German heart dropped. This wasn't the final effort of a surrounded force. This was the normal mission of a military machine with endless supplies. German intelligence officers desperately tried to count and classify what was being delivered. Red parachutes, artillery shells, mortar rounds, small arms bullets. Blue parachutes, medical items, surgical tools, plasma, morphine. Yellow parachutes, food packs. White parachutes, blankets, winter clothes, boots, gloves. Green parachutes, radio gear, batteries, signal items. Orange parachutes, gasoline in 5-gallon cans. By the end of the day, the battalion had 528,000 food packs on hand, along with 2,500 gallons of gasoline. Ammunition supply at day's end was HE-286, WP-177, and AT-201. And this was just what one battalion reported. Multiply this across all the units in Bastogne, and the amazing scale becomes clear. But the morning drop was just the start. Throughout December 23rd, more missions came. At 2 p.m., another wave appeared. This time, it included planes without engines towed by C-47s, carrying heavier supplies that couldn't be dropped by parachute. 92.4 tons, including 2,975 gallons of gasoline, were landed by glider. These gliders brought whole surgical units with doctors, nurses, and operating tools. They brought jeeps, communication gear, and even replacement big guns. One glider carried nothing but cold blood for transfers, a special medical treat the German army couldn't provide even to its highest-ranking officers. German medical officers watching through binoculars were shocked. While they were treating wounded with paper bandages and wood shavings, forced to operate without pain medicine, the Americans were flying in refrigerated blood, penicillin, and surgical teams. The difference in medical ability alone was enough to discourage any observer. By late afternoon, Pathfinder teams had marked several drop areas, and the supply planes were arriving with perfect timing. The artillery was shooting part of the resupply ammunition at the enemy before the drop area had even been emptied. American gunners were actually shooting shells that had been floating down on parachutes just minutes earlier. As if the huge fleet of transports wasn't discouraging enough, the clear weather brought something even worse: the return of American air power in its most scary way. P-47. Thunderbolts started attacking the German troops on the roads. The Thunderbolts came in low and fast, their 850 caliber machine guns firing, rockets shrieking from under their wings. They chased everything that moved: supply trucks, horse-drawn artillery, single vehicles, even small groups of soldiers. Every road became a deadly place. Any movement during the day invited destruction. German forces that had moved freely for a week were suddenly stuck. Supply columns that had been moving to the front were caught in the open and wiped out one by one. The effect on morale was immediate and devastating. After a week of feeling like they were winning, German soldiers were suddenly reminded of what they had faced in Normandy, an enemy with such an advantage in supplies that they could afford to hunt single vehicles with airplanes. By evening on December 23rd, the change in mindset among the German attackers was complete. They had seen not just a supply drop, but a show of massive industrial and supply advantage that was beyond understanding. The numbers were clear and sad. If America could afford to risk hundreds of airplanes and crews to supply one surrounded division, what reserves must they have? If they could deliver hundreds of tons of supplies in perfect order on a few hours' notice, what was their true industrial ability? December 24th brought clouds and snow again, keeping the huge air fleets on the ground. German commanders hoped this might get their edge back. The 26th VG got one Panzer Grenadier regiment from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division on Christmas Eve for its main attack the next day. This would be their last chance. They had to take Bastogne before the weather cleared again. The German plan was a big one, because it didn't have enough troops, and those of the 26th VG Division were near tiredness. The 47th Panzer focused its attack on several separate spots on the west side of the outer edge in order, rather than launching one attack at the same time on all sides. They would attack from the northwest, hoping to push through the supposedly weakened American lines. The attack started in the pre-dawn darkness of Christmas morning. In the early hours of December 25th, Christmas Day, the Germans launched a second major attack meant to wipe out the Bastogne pocket. 18 Mark IV tanks with supporting infantry broke through the thin defense line of the 327th Glider Infantry and began to move toward Hemrola. For a second, it seemed the Germans might win. The tanks broke through and infantry poured through the gap. German soldiers moved through the snow, sure that this time they would break the American defense. But the American response was fierce and supported by the bullets and shells that had been delivered just 2 days earlier. 2 tanks managed to escape the deadly fire of the 406th, but were destroyed by a quickly sent-out armored force from division headquarters. Of the 18 tanks that started the attack, none made it through the day. December 26th delivered the final blow to German hopes. The blockade was broken on December 26th, when a leading force of the 4th Armored Division and other parts of General George Patton's 3rd Army opened a path to Bastogne. In the fading light just after 5 p.m. on the next day, December 26th, the first parts of Combat Command R of the 4th Armored Division broke through the German surrounding from the south and ended the blockade. The first American tanks to enter Bastogne were from the 37th Tank Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who would later lead all U.S. forces in Vietnam. They found the defenders tired but not defeated, supplied by air, and sure of their victory. The real numbers tell the story more clearly than any personal account. According to U.S. Army records, during the Siege of Bastogne, 20.7 tons of supplies and gear, including 41,900 gallons of gasoline, were dropped to the 101st Airborne by parachute, and 92.4 tons, including 2,975 gallons of gasoline, were landed by glider. Breaking this down by day, December 23rd, 241 C-47s in the main drop, plus other missions. December 24th, few operations due to weather. December 25th, weather stopped major operations. December 26th to 27th, continued supply drops even after the ground path was established. In all, over 113 tons of supplies delivered by air, 15,000 plus artillery shells, nearly 8,000 gallons of gasoline, medical items for the wounded, food for 15,000 men, and winter clothes for the troops. Compare this to German abilities. German forces around Bastogne, initially 54,000 men. American forces in Bastogne, 22,000 men. German airplane missions over Bastogne, less than 100. American airplane missions, over 2,000. German supplies delivered by air, 0. After the war, reviews by German military experts confirmed what the soldiers in the field had known in their gut. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, who led the 5th Panzer Army during the attack, thought about the battle in his later writings. The main point of his review was that Bastogne showed the Americans had solved modern warfare's biggest problem: supply lines. They could supply surrounded forces by air better than Germany could supply advancing forces by road. When weather allowed, their advantage in supplies was so great that skill on the battlefield didn't matter. General Major Heinz Kokott, described by Colonel S.L.A. Marshall as a shy, scholarly, and dignified commander who never raises his voice and appears to be moderate in his actions and judgments, gave perhaps the briefest review in his post-war questioning. His observation was clear. When those transport planes filled the sky on December 23rd, every German soldier who saw them understood that they were not fighting just an army. They were fighting an entire industrial society, and they were armed with rifles and horses. The meeting with Kinnard was a visible shock to the German commanders. It seemed unbelievable to them that this young-looking soldier had been one of their main opponents. Lutwitz said, "Are you certain he was chief of operations? Isn't it possible that he was only the chief for one regiment?" The broader effect of the Bastogne air supply moved quickly through German ranks across the entire Ardennes attack. Every unit had soldiers who had either seen it directly or heard detailed stories from those who had. The story got bigger with each telling, but the basic truth stayed the same. America had material resources beyond German understanding. The saddest twist for the German forces was that they had created the very situation for their own mental defeat. By surrounding Bastogne, they had forced the Americans to show their air supply abilities. Had they gone around the town as first planned, they might never have seen this show of massive material advantage. After December 26th, German operations around Bastogne turned into desperate, costly attacks that accomplished nothing. Hitler still demanded that Bastogne be taken as soon as possible. He couldn't believe that a surrounded American force had not only survived, but had been supplied so well that they were stronger after the blockade than before. On December 29th, Dacom received as reinforcements the 1st SS Panzer Division from the 6th Panzer Army. More divisions were thrown into the meat grinder. The 9th SS Panzer The Führer Escort Brigade, the 167th Volksgrenadier, all were weakened greatly against American positions now reinforced and resupplied. The last big German attack started on January 4th and stopped very quickly. German soldiers attacked the same positions over and over, achieving nothing but adding to the lists of the dead and wounded. What the German soldiers had seen was just a small part of American industrial ability. They didn't know that the Douglas C-47 became the workhorse for airborne drops and was used widely for operations like Overlord, Dragoon, Market Garden, and Varsity. Over 10,000 C-47s were made during the war. American factories were making airplanes at rates Germany couldn't match. More than 50,000 paratroops were dropped by C-47s during the war. History has proven the psychological effect of the Bastogne air supply on German forces. Military historians see it as a turning point not just in the Battle of the Bulge, but in showing the uselessness of standard military actions against massive industrial advantage. The U.S. Army's official history notes that German prisoner questioning after December 23rd showed a clear difference in attitude. Before the air supply, captured Germans talked of temporary problems and a final win. After seeing the aerial fleet, they talked only of survival and hoped the war would end soon. The 101st Airborne Division's losses from December 19, 1944 to January 6, 1945 were 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing. Despite being surrounded and outnumbered 5-1, they had suffered fairly light losses, a proof of the effectiveness of the air supply in keeping up their fighting ability. The 101st Airborne would never give up because they didn't have to. Their country could supply them through the air itself, turning the old art of blockade warfare into an outdated thing of the past. The German soldiers who saw those 241 C-47s on December 23, 1944, plus the continuing waves of supply airplanes, saw not just the rescue of Bastogne, but the future of fighting itself, a future that belonged to the nation that could fill the sky with airplanes as easily as Germany could fill a field with soldiers. They had seen the numbers of American abundance, and in those numbers was written the final chapter of the Third Reich. The war would go on for another 5 months. But for those who saw the sky over Bastogne fill with American planes, it had ended on that clear December morning when they realized that the 101st would never give up. Not because they were braver or better soldiers, but because their nation would never let them fail. The planes over Bastogne didn't just supply the 101st Airborne. They destroyed the final false beliefs of a German victory and wrote in the sky the final truth of the Second World War. America's supply of weapons was huge. Its determination was solid and its win was sure. The German soldiers who saw that aerial fleet knew with complete sureness what their leaders would refuse to admit for 4 more months. The war was over, and America had won it in the skies over a small Belgian town on a clear December morning when the whole world could see that the 101st would never surrender.